Okay, maybe we'll get started. So just before we begin, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge that the island of Newfoundland is the ancestral homelands of the Micmac and Beothuk people. And we also recognize the Inuit of Nitassiavut and Nunchigavut and the Inuit of Nitassinan and their ancestors as the original people of Labrador. And we strive for respectful and equitable partnerships with all of the people of this province as we work towards true reconciliation and honoring this beautiful land together. So hi everyone, welcome to our second seminar of the new year, second ever virtual seminar. And today I have the pleasure of introducing Victoria Neville, whom many of you probably know already. Victoria is a MUN alumnus, having completed her undergraduate degree here at MUN, and is now a biologist and former co-chair of the Wilderness and Ecological Reserves Advisory Council. And today, very excited, she'll be talking to us about the Protected Areas Plan for Newfoundland. So without anything further, take it away, Victoria.
Hi, thank you all. Can you hear me today? Everyone can hear? Good, perfect. All right, thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today. I think it was originally shared that I was a researcher who does work on protected areas. That's not actually the case. I am a person who works in the field of fisheries ecology and restoration, and I just so happen to have also spent some time as the co-chair of the Wilderness and Ecological Reserves Advisory Council. So today in my seminar, I'm going to be talking to you about the release of a protected areas plan for the island of Newfoundland. And I've titled my talk One Step Forward, Two Steps Backward. And I think as we go through in the next hour, you'll realize why. So just an outline of what I'll be discussing today. I'm going to be talking to you about what are protected areas, just as a quick dive, what makes a good and successful protected area, what kind of protected areas exist in Newfoundland and Labrador, and then I'll be talking to you about Wilderness and Ecological Reserves and the Wilderness and Ecological Reserves Act. I'll give you a brief history on the WEIR Act, and I'll be talking to you about the long-awaited release of a protected areas plan. And so that's what's happened in the past. I'm also going to be talking to you about what's happening presently. So the consultation process for feedback on that protected areas plan, the backlash from some members of the public for that plan, and our existing human footprint on the island of Newfoundland. And I'll also be talking to you about the future, the next 2 weeks, why and how you should have your say on this protected areas plan. All right, I guess to start off, what are protected areas? I know I'm talking to the Biology Graduate Student Association, so many of you probably know they are areas or locations that receive some form of protection. And usually that's based on natural, ecological, or cultural values. And we know that there are different types of protected areas, and they can vary in their level of protection, and that depends on the country or the enabling laws and regulations organizations involved. But generally speaking, protected areas usually are those in which human presence, or at least the exploitation of natural resources in specific areas, are limited in some way. So before I gave the talk, these are not all of the ecological principles behind a good protected area, but just thinking to myself and doing a quick review, here are a few good ecological principles that we know go behind a protected area. One is representativity. So we have a number of different habitat types within our province or within any area. They have unique geology, unique flora, unique associated fauna. And so a good protected areas plan or a network of protected areas should have representativity of each of those types of habitats. Those habitats should also be intact. So if you're going to set aside a protected area, you best be careful to ensure that that area is relatively intact. And if it is influenced by some form of anthropogenic activity or it's been degraded in some way, it really should have a restoration plan to restore it back to its natural state. size is an important principle to think about for a protected area. So for some areas, a small size will do. So if you're looking to protect a specific type of feature, say a rare plant that inhabits a small bog, or a rare fossils that you're looking to protect, or if you're looking to protect a breeding area that is very small in size, a small area may do. But for larger species or migratory species, such as our boreal caribou, size is going to be really important because they're going to need a variety of different habitat types for calving, for feeding, and they're going to be able to need to utilize resources in some areas and allow them to redound in others. So a large size is important. Next would be connectivity or proximity. So in the absence of a large reserve, you would want to make sure that smaller reserves are connected to one another, or at least in close proximity to one another, to ensure that you get some of those benefits. Edge effects is something that you need to think about when designing protected areas. So you want to make sure that you minimize the edge or the ecotone where species are subjected to stress. So you want to make sure that it's a circle, long, skinny areas with a lot of edge is bad. And if you can, you'd like to work in some buffer zones around the edge of that reserve. Maybe they don't have all of the restrictions of the reserve, but will have enough to reduce the stress of the edge. Of course, critical habitat, sensitive species, and species that are sensitive to threats are all key to include in a protected area. And because it's 2020 and we're all looking at mitigating the effects of climate change, carbon capture is another thing to consider. So beyond the ecological factors, I'm certainly not a social scientist, so again, I'm just speaking from my experience. What are the social factors that I think really make a successful protected area? And I think what I've learned anyway is that community participation is really key. So in order for a protected area to be successful in the long term, community should really participate in identifying areas of importance, and that might be areas of importance to use, or it might be areas of importance that they don't want to protect, that they need for other purposes. They also need to consult on the boundaries, so they should be the ones who are heavily involved in where the shape of that area comes from. And they should also be involved in the development and implementation of a management plan. So a management plan is the associated sort of rules and regulations, what's allowed to happen within the reserve, what is limited. And so a community needs to be a part of that.
Excuse me, Victoria?
Yeah.
So you're talking about people in the areas who they should be representative of these protected areas before they're for protection. Have you actually done that with the people from the Northern Peninsula who are going to be drastically impacted by this plan?
Charlene, I think we should hold our questions and our discussion to the end of the presentation, but I'm more than happy to address it. Is that okay?
Actually, I would like that answer right now, because from my knowledge, this plan did not have representation from the Northern Peninsula at all. And our section of the Northern Peninsula is the biggest land grab for this whole plan. So I would like you to address this now, please.
Sure. Well, I definitely understand, and we're going to get into some of the responses to the protected areas plan and why people feel like they were not included. But I would say that there were representatives of the Northern Peninsula on the Wilderness and Ecological Reserves Advisory Council. So
not
that was
time.
Pardon?
Not at the time that these areas that are currently in the plan, that they were not representative on those areas when this part of the plan was promoted. And I know that
yeah, I totally get that, Charlene, and neither was I. I had actually resigned from the Wilderness and Ecological Reserves Advisory Council when it was released. But you have to understand that this was a body of work that took place over 25 years. And so there was multiple successive rear acts that actually contributed to it. And the folks that were members of the Wilderness and Ecological Reserves Council, when it was released, are not solely responsible for the protected areas plan. They're just responsible for the part where they begin this consultation process. Now,
Okay.
if that's okay, I'd like to be able to continue my presentation now.
I think we'll just hold all the questions till the end. That's okay.
All right. Okay, thank you. All right, so yes, exactly. So communities need to directly benefit from a protected areas plan in order to have a successful, thriving area. And so those benefits can include things like recreation, the continuation of traditional activities, and they should primarily be the ones who benefit from job creation. So if there are fringe benefits associated with a protected area, which might include outfitting or Airbnbs or restaurateurs or ecotourism or any, like even car rental businesses, it really is important that built within that, the community benefits are premier. And of course, another important community benefit is, of course, health and wellness. So they should be able to access those areas to ensure that they can access the ecosystem services, but also the mental health benefits. Okay, so there are a number of different types of protected areas that exist within Newfoundland and Labrador. There's marine protected areas and marine refuges in the ocean. And both of those are set up federally by the Oceans Act and the Fisheries Act. And on land, we have our national parks, provincial parks, and we also have our wilderness and ecological reserves. And that's really what we're going to be talking about today, is wilderness and ecological reserves. In the future, it's hopeful that there will be more Indigenous-led and community-led protection. And so there is a lot of talk about IPCAs and changes in government policy to encourage these, but the legislative tools necessary to secure these areas are still being navigated. And so there's probably some folks on the call who know a lot more about these topics than I do, but I just wanted to give a nod to the different types of protected areas. But today I'm going to be talking to you about the Wilderness and Ecological Reserves Act. And so this is provincial legislation that was actually passed in the 1980s, and it was intended to protect wilderness areas and wildlife habitat. It is considered to be one of the best examples of wilderness protection legislation in Canada. And why is that? It's because there's actually a legal framework and process that includes public participation consultations. And so what that essentially means is that there's actually built into the law of the Wilderness and Ecological Reserves Act that no protected area can be established without public consultation. And there's actually a step-by-step process outlined in the protected areas, or sorry, in the Act itself that explains how that needs to go forward. There's also, the Act creates something that's called an Independent Advisory Committee or Council called WERAC. That's the Wilderness and Ecological Reserves Advisory Council. And so what this essentially means is that any protected area that is established under this Act, it goes through this independent council. It's not just subjected to a minister's decision. No area can be created, changed, or taken away without going through the council, going through the public consultation, and then going up to the minister. And that's not the case for a lot of provincial legislation, such as our Parks Act. And the wilderness and ecological reserves that are set up they're not typical parks in the sense that they're not camping loops. They're not just areas for you to go set up a tent and, there's a little parking lot there. These are areas that are specifically designed with ecology in mind. And so there's generally two types. There's an ecological reserve, which is generally a small area that, as I mentioned earlier, is going to cover a specific feature. So examples include Mistaken Point, which cover our fossils, or the Witless Bay Ecological Reserve, which puffins use during their time when they're their chicks. And they're generally pretty small, and they meet their criteria in that way. And typically speaking, ecological reserves are a little bit strict in what you can do. And that's because they're usually involving very sensitive species. So you can't necessarily go and berry pick or have a boil up in an ecological reserve if those activities can impact those sensitive habitats. The other thing that it sets up, though, is larger areas that are known as wilderness reserves. And wilderness reserves are, they're a lot more flexible generally. They usually allow for activities like hunting, canoeing, boating, a lot of different types of outdoor recreation. And they are generally larger because they're going to be capturing a huge amount of migratory area for different species. So they have two different purposes, but they're both covered by this act. So I just wanted to quickly go through the timeline of what has happened in prep and since the establishment of the Weir Act. So in the 1970s, there was actually a lot of pressure to develop and clear cut some really beautiful natural areas. And Dr. Bill Montevecchi can probably speak to this a little bit more than I can, because I've only been able to pull what I can see in old newspaper clippings or peer-reviewed literature. But there was definitely pressure, in particular in areas like the Main River watershed, which was designated to be one of the most pristine and productive watersheds in Canada. And so there was a lot of community and environmental groups lobbying to protect the old growth forest in that area and to protect other areas. So as a result of that, there was something called the Wildlands Committee. And they put together a recommendation for this thing called the Weir Act. And later that year, in 1980, the Weir Act was passed, and later that year, the subsequent council was formed. And throughout the 1980s, there was fairly steady progress, and I think that continued into the 1990s with about one reserve per year being established, so it was doing its job. By the 1990s, the government of Newfoundland and Labrador was now looking at the idea of protected areas in more of a systems approach. So instead of folks just recommending an area and it going through a process, we now recognize that we had specific features based on ecology and geology that we wanted to capture. And so along with other governments, provincial and federal governments, they signed a commitment to complete Canada's network of protected areas. And all governments agreed to complete their protected area systems by the year 2000. And it was, I believe, in 1995 that the Minister of Environment and Conservation established the process for creating a province-wide system of reserve, which was then called the Natural Area Systems Plan, or the NAS. More recently, it's called the Protected Areas Plan, or the PAP, so I may switch between them. Unfortunately, actually, in the mid to late 1990s, there was also a loss of some provincial parks in our area, and that kind of speaks to the strength of the Weir Act legislation. Because these parks were actually set up as provincial parks, in 1995 and 1997, a lot of them were privatized and were kind of knocked off of the provincial responsibility. Unfortunately, while the Weir Act was quite successful for some time, in the 2000s, some of the momentum was lost, and eventually the 3-year terms for each of the members of the Weir Act expired. And so Weir Act actually was not reinstated for 7 years until 2014. And it was actually in 2014 that I came on. And I went and I looked in some old Weir Act reports, and I found this statement, which I think is helpful. Of primary concern is a lack of progress in the implementation of the Natural Areas Systems Plan. Despite a strong commitment to protected areas and sustainable development in government's Blue Book, little progress on the actual designation of protected areas has been made. Release of the Weir Act's NAS for public review and discussion was recommended in 1996 by a NAS committee established in 1995. To date, this has not happened. The absence of public consultations on a draft NASP and the release of a final NASP are the most significant obstacles faced by Weir Act in the execution of its mandate. So this was in the early 2000s. By the 2010s, some of that momentum was being lost at a quicker rate. Newfoundland and Labrador's premier sort of mining industry group that advocates for all of the prospectors and mining industry around had begun to lobby against protected areas in general. In fact, they asked publicly that if any other protected areas were established, that an equal amount of protected areas would be relinquished for mineral exploration. Also at that time, a policy paper was dedicated to Newfoundland and Labrador's insufficient progress towards protected areas. But in 2014, the Weir Act was back. 11 new members of Weir Act were appointed by Cabinet, and that included me. I was actually asked by the biology department to apply to be a member of the Weir Act because they were looking for a youth perspective. So that was a while ago. And after the WIRAC was reformed, there was a mandate letter to the minister, the provincial minister responsible. And it was from our Premier Dwight Ball. And it said, I don't even remember who the Premier was then, but you are expected to finalize and publicly release the Natural Area Systems Plan. So there was hope at that time that this would happen. However, although WIRAC continued their duties of consulting on changes to protected areas and issues of significance to the protected areas plan, it was in 2019 that WIRAC awaited a new mandate letter to the minister responsible. And it was in late 2019 that WIRAC, at least myself and Dr. Montevecchi, were troubled by the lack of urgency in the new mandate letter, which said, working in collaboration with your colleagues, the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Environment and Minister of Natural Resources, you are to continue work on a natural area systems plan. So you can see there's no longer this push for this to be released immediately, but it's more continue to work on it. So at that time, myself, who was at that time the co-chair of WIRAC and the longest standing member of WIRAC, actually resigned. And so here's just a collection of some of the articles. So our resignations happened in January, and by February, we had done a little bit of speaking to the media. Expert advisors to Newfoundland Labrador government resign in protest. Environmentalists at odds with minister over progress on protection on natural areas. Environmental advisors resign, claiming NL government won't listen. I can't be complicit any longer in a process that failed, says wildlife biologists. Outdoor advocates were concerned about this troubling news. And in response to this, the minister responsible having a protected areas plan pretty much ready to go, as it had been drafted in the mid-1990s and had been continually worked on, was ready to release the Natural Area Systems Plan, but he was cautious at that time to say neither industry nor environmentalists would applaud. I think he was concerned about the compromises that come between industrial use of the province and the ecological principles. And the committee released in March that they were ready to planned to release the Natural Area Systems Plan. I'm just going to do a check-in because I'm taking a look here and I'm not sure how we're doing on time. Does anyone want to let me know how much time I have left?
You've got about 34 minutes left.
Perfect.
Till 1 o'clock.
So I won't rush through anymore. Perfect. Okay, so the Wilderness and Ecological Reserves Advisory Council, now lost of myself and Dr. Montevecchi, and still populated by dedicated members of the public, prepared to release the Natural Area Systems Plan after this additional pressure was placed on the government at the time. And as you can see in the article, the environment critic at the time, Jim Dinn, questions why it's taking these resignations for the government to act. And then there was an article that I actually came out with in response to some of the things that the minister was saying at the time that were concerning to me. I was excited that the Protected Areas Plan was going to be released, but there was this narrative that was being put out by the minister that the reason the Protected Areas Plan hadn't been released thus far is that WIRAC would not budge on the ecological principles and that they were that there was just no compromise there. And that certainly wasn't the case from my experience. In fact, that I'd seen that the compromise was, there was quite a bit of compromise in the plan, and you'll see that shortly. He also was quick to say that the new plan was not necessarily the plan of the provincial government, but the plan of the Wilderness and Ecological Reserves Advisory Council, which really wasn't appropriate to the legislation at the time because the WIRAC simply advises Cabinet. The actual responsibility of a protected areas plan was the responsibility of government and is outlined in the mandate letters to the minister. So I was a bit concerned, so I made sure in early March, before everything shut down with COVID, that I made my opinion heard in the telegram, that I was concerned about this type of spin. And finally, the WIRAC plan was released in May, and it was celebrated by the Nature Conservancy of Canada, which commended the provincial government for releasing the plan for the province. And there was definitely concerns that came out over the conservation plan, and this article kind of captures that. Because the protected areas plan was really had never gone out to public consultation before, and this was the stage that it was at now, was that it's being publicly released as this is the plan, and let's hear your feedback from the public. But I think that because there was no management plan outlined for each of those areas, folks started to get really concerned about which activities would be allowed to be continued and which activities may be limited. And so I think that it was probably not the best time to release a protected areas plan in the middle of the global pandemic. And in addition to that, I don't think that diligence was done to make sure that the process was really clear to the public. And so there were some very legitimate concerns about way of life. In particular, on the Northern Peninsula, folks were concerned if private land would be included. They were concerned about whether they'd be able to continue to hunt and fish. They were concerned about whether they'd be able to cut wood to heat their homes. They were concerned about whether they would be able to access their cabins and their homes in the way that they traditionally did. So there was quite a bit of concern that came out after that. Graham Wood, who is the current chair of the WIRAC, tried to reassure the public this time that we're really just commenting on the idea of a protected areas plan now, and that the nitty-gritty would come out in those individual consultations with the public, and that the public would, of course, really have a huge say in what that management plan would be, and even the boundaries of the reserve. And of course, there was a couple of articles coming out about some attacks that were coming out. People were being a little bit rude, and it kind of came out in the media as well, that folks needed to kind of temper some of the way that they were speaking to one another. So the backlash really to this protected areas plan, due to the lack of sort of a proper educational rollout, I believe, in my opinion, there was a large social media reaction. So there was multiple Facebook groups with 3,000 to 5,000 members. It's not clear if they were the same members in each of the groups. There was a formation of a committee, the Great Northern Peninsula United Against WIRAC Committee, which began to write letters to the ministers and let them know. And there was a bit of passing off responsibility by the ministers in cabinet, who were keen to say, okay, well, this is WIRAC's plan, it's not our plan, which fed into a bit of an unfair situation where the volunteers of the Wilderness and Ecological Reserves Advisory Council were expected to answer for this plan entirely. And there was actually a petition that came out to the House of Assembly, and there were some personal attacks and threats of violence to members of WIRAC. So I'm just going to take a moment to share with you the presentation of the petition in the House of Assembly, just so that you can get an idea of how the province was kind of responding to this.
Petition forward, and we did this just for sign, but these are electronic signatures. This issue is a grave concern for a lot of people in the province, and I know my colleague Minister of Advanced Education Skills across the way spoke out about it last week as well, and the Great Northern Peninsula is going to be adversely affected. I was asked to bring it forward. A lot of people in my own district that use those areas for cabin country and what have you have great concerns. I mean, this also affects development, also affects prospecting. There's a lot of effects on this plan. And it's been rumored about, and it's been in the media, this plan was kicking around for 25 years. And that's probably accurate. I know when we were previous administration there, and I worked with the former Minister of Environment. This was debated. This plan was debated. But upon debate and consideration, there was too many drawbacks. The negatives outweighed the positives, and it was never proceeded with because it affected too many. It had the negatives outweighed the positives, and that's all I can say. Sure, you got areas where people got cabins, existing cabins, they want to get to, they want to drive snowmobiles, ATVs, they want to cut wood. It's their way of life. They're already existing. They're going to be limited by this. Plus your development. So all along, Mr. Speaker, this will have a negative impact. This don't have the proper balance, and I call upon government to reconsider and do proper consultations that everyone's a fair say in the process. Thank you very much.
Okay, you guys can still hear me? Hello?
Yes,
yeah, you're good.
Okay, good. Okay, so I just wanted to showcase that for a moment because I thought it was really important. Because the concerns of the committee and the concerns of the minister who brought that petition were, they're valid, very serious concerns. However, the intent of these wilderness areas is not to actually limit existing activity, but instead to freeze that footprint. So I believe that parks and natural areas and the management plan that would be developed for any of these protected areas would not stop those activities, and that they would be ideally developed in collaboration with those folks. And then it really hit me that he really showcases that this has been discussed in cabinet many times before, behind closed doors, before it was able to go out to public consultation. He's saying, hey, we've talked about this, and the negatives outweighed the positives. And I think that it would be naive for us to think that a real economic or ecological analysis of what the positives and the negatives was presented to cabinet, because WIRAC was never engaged in that particular discussion. So I really think that when we think about all of the positives that protected areas provide in terms of clean air, carbon sequestration, recreation and health, the protection of wildlife, which we need for food security, I really don't believe the minister when he says that the benefits or the negatives outweigh the positives, because I haven't seen that analysis, and I think that's premature. Okay, so why was there this negative reaction? Well, there was negative reaction because there's always going to be negative reaction to a protected areas plan, because it does limit development in some way, and it certainly will limit some human activities. So in a protected area, there's always going to be some winners and losers, and someone is going to lose out in some way. It's the responsibility of the province to make sure that that's approached equitably and fairly. Also, the plan had sat behind closed doors for about 25 years. So if there was public literacy about the WIRAC process, that had long been lost, and there was a feeling of people had been snuck up on. The timing and rollout, like I said, was poor. The timing was at a time when people were highly stressed and couldn't meet in person to discuss these things. And there was no, while during COVID, there was lots of stuff from the Department of Tourism coming out saying, stay home year, enjoy your province, blah, blah, blah. There was no subsequent plan or media or videos released to say about what protected areas we had, what are the benefits of protected areas, really showcasing the majesty of our province. And there was a lot of misinformation out, that people thought that just because a wilderness reserve was established that you couldn't go so much as pick a flower in that area. And that's just not the case for all of the existing wilderness and ecological reserves. They're quite flexible in terms of their management plan. And of course, there's a perception that rural communities would bear the brunt of the sacrifices for these services. And I think Charlene really made that point earlier when she wanted to speak about consultation. And I hear and I take those concerns really seriously. But I'm not the person who is responsible for the plan. Just wanted to give you guys an opportunity to see it. This is the plan as it came out. The green is our existing protected areas in the province. And the lines with the numbers on them outline the proposed protected areas. So there's 24 new protected areas proposed. There's an expansion of 2 protected areas, and there's creation of 6 transitional reserves. And what a transitional reserve is essentially an area that that will allow for mineral exploration for the next 10 years. And if no one develops that into a mine, or if no one finds anything significant over the next 10 years, then it can begin the process of transitioning into protection. It just really stops prospectors from really keeping sticky notes all over the province that prevent protection areas. It does increase the level of protection for the island of Newfoundland to 12.5%. From what it is, which is 6.7%. And with the inclusion of the transitional reserves, it would get up to 13.2. And the plan increases the level of protection for 19 of the 25 natural regions. Some of the drawbacks is that it's significantly reduced from the original plan that was based on ecological principles in the 1995, and I think you'll see why soon. Labrador is notably absent in this plan, at least temporarily, and I believe that's just due to the existing Indigenous-led processes that are ongoing in terms of land claims establishment. So it's just perhaps the protected areas plan needed a little bit more time. And it doesn't meet sort of the international key targets of 17% by 2020. So it's not an ambitious plan. So this is where we sit now, according to the release of the Protected Areas Plan, of about 6.9% compared to the percent protected terrestrial area for other provinces. And this would be, if we didn't look at it as just the island of Newfoundland, but if we looked at it as Newfoundland and Labrador in general, the level of protection that the Protected Areas Plan would increase. So it is a modest increase, but for folks that are directly adjacent, it can be a large increase. So how representative is the plan? So this is a picture of all of the natural regions of Newfoundland, the island of Newfoundland. There are 25 natural regions, and if you want to learn more about them, you can find it on our provincial Fish and Land Resources website. They actually have really cool information sheets on every one of these different areas and what's special about it, what the geology is, what the ecology is, etc. But if you look at the Protected Areas Plan, it does an okay job. For a large portion of the project or of the island, protection is either fair, good, or very good. And for a small percentage, unfortunately, the plan isn't ambitious enough. It's perhaps because some of those areas are already so developed that enough natural area couldn't be identified, or it could be that some areas were just not able to be developed because there may be another claim to them. Okay, so the next line I think it's important to talk about is intactness, because we wanted to make sure that it was representative, but how do protected areas planners actually decide which areas are pristine enough to protect? So this is an image, this is a little series of images that the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society put out this week, and I think it's really telling, and it helps to have the general public understand what the pressures a protected areas planner is under when they're trying to establish areas. So here are our existing parks and reserves, and you should note that there's a bit of an exaggeration of the size of some of those, just simply due to the width of the border of them. So they're actually quite a bit smaller, some of these small dots. And here's your protected areas that are proposed. So the ones that are just circled in green are the proposed reserves, and the ones with the little slant in them are the ones that are transitional. And so here are some of the existing footprints that are already on the island of Newfoundland. So here are our transmission lines. Here are our roads. Here are our hydroelectric reservoirs. Here are the municipal boundaries that are either fully developed or planned to be developed for people to live. Here's your commercial forestry, not just areas that have been cut, but areas that roads have, logging roads have been built. Here's areas where there are staked claims, where there's active mineral exploration. I find this one really interesting. This is historical mineral exploration, so this kind of showcases some of the areas that might be of value to the province. So if you take a look at the areas where there are transitional reserves, I find in almost all of them, that there is some historical mineral exploration. So it really helps you to understand what a protected areas planner is dealing with when they're trying to negotiate for these areas, is that someone thinks there might be something of value there that is worth exploring for the next 10 years before something can happen to protect it. And then there are quarries as well. So when you take a look at this context, instead of just the protected areas plan alone, it really makes you understand that there's not just this vast untouched wilderness that we have to deal with when we're trying to design a network of protected areas. It's not so easy to just design it based on ecological principles of intactness and shape and boundaries and representativity when you have an area that, believe it or not, is actually quite developed. And so that becomes a challenge. I guess I wanted to kind of end our presentation in a bit of a call to action for those who are participating, and let you know that phase 1, which is the public feedback on the proposed sites, this is just general feedback. Are these the right sites, and what kind of activities do you like to do in those sites? That's continuing for the next 2 weeks until October 1st. And there's a number of ways you can give feedback on that. And then that will kick off phase 2, which is the more consultative process that will happen site by site with the public directly adjacent to the proposed area. So I guess the take-homes are extensive cooperation and land use planning are needed to meet protected areas targets if we are to do so for the island of Newfoundland. The government of Newfoundland Labrador has kept core staff dedicated to the creation of the Natural Area Systems Plan and maintenance of parks natural areas throughout this entire period. With the support of WIRAC, a protected areas plan has been the priority of those staff for 25 years. There has been a lack of willingness by governments of both major parties to facilitate the necessary compromises between industry, land users, and environmental protections, and that has stalled the release of the NASP until this year. Now that it's been released, there's also a lack of education, transparency, and awareness program to support the Natural Area Systems Plan. And it's my belief that without letters of support or feedback from an online forum at the engage.ca website from as many personal individuals and environmental groups as possible, this version of the Protected Areas Plan may collapse or go back on the shelf for another 25 years. So we really need you, whatever your perspective is on the Protected Areas Plan, to engage and to give your feedback. And there's a number of ways. So here's the ways I suggest. What you can do right now, if if you got your smartphone on, you can begin to follow the following pages. CPAWS NL, Nature NL, and NL WIRAC are all active on Twitter, and they share a lot of information. I have a Facebook group called Support a Home for Nature, Island of Newfoundland. That's the name of the Protected Areas Plan. And also WIRAC, CPAWS, and Nature NL have pages that you can follow on Facebook and Instagram. I personally find that the Twitter and Facebook is a little bit better than the Instagram, but there's lots of stuff there on Instagram as well. If you have 10 minutes of internet time, CPAWS and Nature NL have both got some automated letter forms that you can fill out. So you can go to either of those websites. This is CPAWS, so they've got a pre-written letter for you for one that you can send to WIRAC and your MHA, one you can send as a former Newfoundland Labrador resident if you no longer live there, or as just an invested Canadian who wants to see this in general. Of course, they're pre-written, but they give you the opportunity to edit. So if you want to change anything that's written in there, or if you want to add some points, or if you have other concerns, you can do that. And Nature NL, they also have a pre-written letter, and this is just basically giving general support to the Protected Areas Plan and wanting to move forward to the next step, which is public consultation. If you have 15 to 30 minutes of internet time, I recommend that you go on to engagenl.ca and fill out their form. They have a form there, and it's only got 4 questions, pretty straightforward. There's indicate your general level of support for the plan, which is like, I don't want this plan, or I need to know more, or I'm totally for this plan. 2, is enough area being represented, or are the right areas being represented? So this one gives you an opportunity to say, ask for more if you wanted to, or say maybe there's too much if that's your belief. And if you think there are areas that are not included, you can actually give the latitude and longitude of those areas. And then if you do have, spend any time in one of the proposed reserves, this is an opportunity to tell WERAC now, before the next stage of the consultation, like what activities do you do in that area? What do you use it for? And what would you like to continue in the future? And then it gives you an opportunity to ask any further questions that you'd like to have answered or comments that you may have. So it's only going to take you 15 to 30 minutes. But if you have an hour or more, you can prepare your own written submission and submit it to the below address. So this is werac@government.nl.ca. And you can send it by snail mail if you'd like to at this address. I recommend if you have an hour or more that you flick through the protected areas plan and you read it and you try and understand it. There's a lot of that information available straight on the Facebook pages, so you can scroll through those. But it's a bit heavy. It's a bit like the Bible or your supervisor's book. You know, it's something that you might want to refer to a couple of times over a period. So it's time to dig in now.
Victoria.
That's pretty much my whole presentation, guys. So I'd now like to give the floor to BGSA to facilitate a respectful discussion.
I have a question.
Okay, just if we just hold our questions for a couple minutes, I'd just like to, and I'm sure everyone else would like to join me in thanking Victoria for her presentation, and we will. The way we will handle questions is, if you do have a question, please type it in the chat box. If everyone knows where that is, and I will tell Victoria that we have a question. Does everyone have access to that chat box?
No, I don't. I do not.
Okay. Okay. Well, then we'll let you ask your first question. And everyone else, please, if you have access to the chat box, let us know that you have a question there.
Okay. First, I'll start with a statement. And the statement is that on the Northern Peninsula, people have already been aware that they have allowed government to protect areas. And the government has agreed to let them use the land in the way that they originally did. And then once they had the protection, they slowly removed the rights of the individuals and the residents here to use that land in the way that they had originally agreed. This is why the people of the Great Northern Peninsula are against this plan. And were you aware of that, Victoria?
I'm not sure which types of protections or freedoms that you're talking about specifically. What I can say is if I take a look at the industrial footprint and the availability of Crown land, that there's a lot of area available on the Northern Peninsula that could potentially be developed. But I don't mean to discount any of the grassroots and local levels of protection that you may have be aware of. But I just want to encourage you as well, Charlene, to remember that this is still just the opportunity for the public to give feedback on the plan. I know that there's a lot of area in the Northern Peninsula that is set aside as ecologically valuable. And I really encourage you, and I know that you and your group are being super vocal about it, and you should definitely influence those boundaries. And I don't think that you have as much to worry about, because I know that the legislative process will not allow a protected area to go ahead on the Northern Peninsula that doesn't engage the priorities of the communities adjacent. I know that you have probably fear and not a lot of trust in government, and I feel a lot of that too on the other side, but you know, I encourage you to continue to participate.
They already have done that here. That's the problem. And the reason it has happened here is because of the fact that they made promises, and once they had what they wanted, the promises disappeared. And this plan has included the Great Northern Peninsula in one big huge bubble with all the rest of the province, and all they need is approval of this plan from everybody else to do the exact same thing here again. And that is why the people here are so upset. We need the support of the people against this plan because of that fact. We know here that there's been areas that were put under protection, and now people need a permit to go berry picking there. We know that they don't even let us on particular areas of land, but they did when it was first protected under this law. And we know that this law has the power to do that once these protections are in place. And a lot of the area on the Great Northern Peninsula includes cabins, and in the legislation it states that anyone who owns a piece of land or is granted a piece of land, that piece of land can be expropriated by the government, which means the government can take that land from that person. It also states that that land cannot be passed down through generations. So someone who has a cabin will not be able to give it to their sons. They will not be able to upkeep their cabin or change it, their land in any way, shape, or form. That's what this legislation is telling people will be put in place once it passes. And it's not just my area. I've been speaking with someone in another area who has cabins in another area in Central, I believe, and their concerns are the exact same thing. So that's why we're against this plan. All on the Northern Peninsula, the tourism operators here are against it, the lodges are against it, the people are against it. Why? Because we've lived it already. That's why.
Okay, Charlene, we really hear you. We really hear your concerns, and I know for a fact that the ministers are hearing you. And you know, I definitely respect your experience here, and I want you to participate in the process. And thank you for sharing those. I think, if that's okay, that there are some other folks who may have some questions. So if you're ready, and you've had everything you need to say out for now, if we could move on to the next questions, I would appreciate it.
Great.
Thank you.
I think we have a next question from Kat. Asked your question earlier on.
Sure.
Go ahead, Kat.
I'm just wondering if it's what I thought that all the provinces are compelled by the federal government to like protect a certain amount so that we can have a certain amount protected within Canada. Mm-hmm. So how is it that the provincial government in Newfoundland can vote that down type thing?
Vote it down type thing? I don't know exactly. I think that we're sort of compelled as a country to protect that 17%, but I don't think it necessarily has to translate to like each province has that equal amount. But I think that the sort of not in our backyard process or argument doesn't really help many because we have so much amazing wildlife and habitat here in Newfoundland, Labrador that I think there's some opportunities here. That we should. It's in my opinion that our plan isn't ambitious enough and that we need more. That's my opinion, obviously. Yeah, so they can't really, there are national parks and national processes that can go forward through different legislative steps, but the province still has a voice in that. So this particular tool is the WEIR Act that can meet those targets, but we can also do so through national park establishment.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next we have a question from Catherine.
Hi, Victoria. Great talk. Thanks very much. I'm just curious, you drew a distinction between wilderness reserves and ecological reserves, and you said that, if I understand you, you said that sort of more activities are potentially permitted in the wilderness reserves. And I'm curious whether the plan as released makes recommendations for whether these proposed areas should be wilderness reserves or ecological reserves, or is that something that gets decided during public consultation?
Where's he to?
Yeah, so I think that that is one of the fallbacks, I guess, of the plan, and I think it was meant to be flexible. It doesn't make a recommendation, but some folks who were former members of Parks and Natural Area staff have really recommended that a lot of the larger areas are considered as wilderness reserves. So I think that many of the areas, especially the large areas, would be best fit as a wilderness reserve. And I think that really captures, the trying to get to those targets, right? Trying to get to protect large areas enough that wildlife can continue to succeed, but not limit human enjoyment and recreation in those areas.
Okay, thanks.
But no, it does get worked out in the management plan. So, the type or level of protection isn't decided yet. But I have noticed that in Newfoundland and Labrador, we tend to have more flexibility, but I don't mean to say that to discount anyone who may have had some of their traditional activities in the past limited. I know that through the Gross Morin process, although we all look back and love Gross Morin, there are some families and people that were negatively impacted.
Do we have any more questions from the folks who are still here?
I think we have a question from, I'm not sure your name, sorry. It's E. Edinger had a question in the chat.
Sure. Might be a comment. Provinces are not compelled by the federal, so he's helping to answer a question earlier, and Evan is more of an expert on this than I am. Dr. Edinger says, the provinces are not compelled by the federal government to meet a certain target. Provinces control provincial land, and each province developed its own strategy to meet the targets. However, the federal government does provide financial support to support reserve establishment and management. So, okay, good points to be made there. If no one else has any questions, I'd love to ask Bill if there's anything that I left out during this story that you might want to add as the sort of the other member of WIRAC who has since left. Oh, I can't hear.
Bill, you can go ahead if you're still here.
Bill's mouth is definitely moving, but I'm not hearing the sound. Maybe if he takes off his earphones, it might work, or he tries to unmute himself. I'm not sure.
It looks like he's unmuted, but.
Oh my, Bill, that's okay. We'll give him a sec, since it's only 2.
Oh, there we go. Still not hearing you, Bill.
That's okay. I put him on the spot anyway.
Do we have any more questions? Well, hopefully Bill is able to become unmuted.
Okay, it looks like Evan Edinger is on the line and he has a question. So I won't step in front of our moderator, but I'll let him know.
Go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, so I'm really curious about the comments and questions from the speaker from the Northern Peninsula. I think her name was Charlene. And I think this is the kind of thing we need to find more information about. So if people up there feel that they were told one thing and then another thing happened, then we need to know about that. What are the areas from which they say that they're not allowed to even so much as pick a berry? this is a kind of detail that where it's really important to understand what has actually happened. And if somebody's been told one thing and then the government does something totally different, that's not right. So that's where we need, getting to the bottom of that would actually be very, very helpful. The other thing is that when WERAC goes out to do the consultations in any one area, they are meant to gather information, but they're not in a position to negotiate and make a recommendation to government, and the government makes a decision. And that is, so it's that sort of two-step process. I don't know how much can get lost in translation between those two. And I don't know, Bill, you've been involved in those local area consultations. You might be able to comment on that more. Or Victoria.
I don't know if Bill is.
Yeah, Vic.
Oh, he is able to speak. Good.
Could you hear me now?
Yes, please.
Well, thank you. I just think, Victoria, I think that's magnificent what you've done, and I think, and your hard work is obvious, and I think it's a good example for all of us all the time. And I think that you really offer us a breath of fresh air. We don't have to be apologetic about protecting our environment, and we just don't want to go down that dark hole. And I totally agree. I think if I lived on the Northern Peninsula, I think I would feel the same way. And I think we have to resolve this. I don't think we're talking about a land grab. This is not taking anything from anybody, and it can't do that. So I think, yes, we have to engage everybody, and we have to engage the people in the Northern Peninsula who are against this and respect their views. And I'm sure we can do that. And I just want to say, well, Vic, you kind of said this, but I just want to say we've lost some for sure because of reactions from communities about protecting a particular area that they felt they had ownership in, and in some sense they do. But we've also had magnificent experiences where communities have simply embraced these protected area plans, and with no great payback for them other than the same things I think we all ask for, that they have protected area in their immediate vicinity, but they're not going to be able to cut down the forest or have a nickel mine in that area. But we have lots of opportunities to do those things, and we have fewer opportunities to set these things aside. And besides, I think that I don't want to go on, and I'll just cut this kind of short here, but I think the CPAWS video that you showed really sums it up, because we're really driving. We're so fortunate in Newfoundland. I feel so lucky to live here, and when I just hike up on the hill right outside our house and I see lots of forest and in natural areas, I just feel great. And I think lots of us share that. But I think we have to realize, as that CPAWS video pointed out, we can't create this stuff, and when it gets hammered and destroyed, it takes centuries sometimes if there's any restoration at all. So anyway, thank you, Victoria, for your efforts. And I, like you, I would encourage everybody to make some feedback about this, because this is your hometown. And, if you don't do it, nobody else will. So thanks very much. And thank you, Victoria.
Thanks, Bill. It looks like we have another question from Kat. If you'd like to go ahead.
Hi, I think Evan just answered in the chat, but I was just wondering if it was WERAC who was responsible for the community consultations, because as you said, this is a plan that is being advised by WIRAC, but it's the plan of the government. It seems like a lot of the responsibility is placed on WIRAC to develop and to do the community consultation. So I was just wondering.
Yeah, it's supposed to be that way. The whole design and why this legislation is so powerful is because of this independent committee. And it should be noted that it's not like anybody can apply. You have to be appointed, but you go through the independent appointees council. And so WIRAC tends to represent folks who have natural resource background, whether they're ecologists or they work in a resource industry or they work in tourism, or, you know, we've even had folks from enforcement who are participating. And what they essentially do is there's a secretariat, like WIRAC has a secretariat, it's the Parks and Natural Areas section of the provincial government. And so when a consultation takes place, WIRAC is there and they sign off on, you know, sort of the what we heard document that would go to the minister. And so that kind of gives that level of transparency that there's an independent group that is not directly paid for, they're not paid at all, they're all volunteers, from diverse backgrounds that really don't have that much to lose. And they ensure that the content of that document is reflective of what they heard, versus a process that might just directly involve government, and then you might run into a little bit of a transparency issue. So that's the intent.
Okay, thank you.
Victoria, could I make a quick, could I say something quickly again?
Go ahead.
I just want to make everyone aware that there have been councils on the Northern Peninsula, and I'm aware of, I believe, at least 3 who have met with WIRAC, and they have not felt heard. They said it was a complete waste of time. They did not seem to want to listen to the councils, and it was a complete disappointment.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that, Charlene. I can't speak to it, unfortunately. I wasn't part of WIRAC at that time, but
and I understand you weren't. That's why I called in today, to let you guys know that we do not feel heard here. We do not feel heard. And we have experienced this before. We have the Burnt Cape Ecological Reserve up here. We have Ducks Unlimited was years ago. You know, there are areas here that have been protected already. We've lived it. We know what they do, and we are not heard here. And that's why we want the government just out.
Let's just take a sec here and talk a moment about the Burnt Cape Ecological Reserve, because it's my understanding that there's some, and I'm certainly not a botanist in any stretch of the word. There may be some botanists here. From what I understand, the Burnt Cape Ecological Reserve protects some rare plants like Longs brea, and is one of those types of reserves that's relatively small, but limits what people can do because it could be damaging. But from what I understand, it's mostly rock with these rare plants upon it. And I also have traveled to the region, and I know that there are folks who are benefiting from the Burnt Cape Reserve by, doing eco tours through it, and that there are cabins that people can stay and do a tour. I'm not sure if my perception of that reality is a little biased, and why people may have a negative reaction to Burnt Cape, because to me, I see it as a very positive thing.
The locals aren't up there at all. Would have the.
Charlene,
blocked off from.
you seem to be breaking up a little bit. I'm having trouble hearing you.
I think Charlene's probably making a statement about like restrictions in Burnt Cape, and I think that that's probably pretty valid in the sense that Burnt Cape is particularly delicate plant life, but it wouldn't be indicative of what the larger protected areas would likely look like, but definitely valid experience. And I wasn't able to hear most of what she said about, but I did hear the word blocked off. So I assume,
I'm not sure if you can hear me better now.
okay.
But yeah, my husband, is this good now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, my husband's actually from Raleigh.
Okay.
And like there's a lot of people that would go up there because there's cannon holes in the hills. There's a big oven. Like there were people who just used to go up there, take their kids and show them these things and walk around. They weren't allowed to do that anymore.
Wow.
Like I would not be allowed to go down now and just take my kids up there and show them what my husband went visiting when he was small.
Okay, just so you know, Charlene, there's somebody in the chat who's would like to respond to what you have to say. So I'm going to turn it over to BGSA so that you can have a dialogue with them for a minute, but I've heard everything that you're saying.
Great.
Yep.
Go ahead, Evan, if you want to.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
So I'm one of the current members of the Wirac Council, and so since June we've been holding telephone conference calls with community town councils in the Northern Peninsula and elsewhere. So, and the discussions with each town council or regional council have been different depending upon who's on it and where they go. We feel like our job is primarily to listen. And so if you tell us that the town councils feel like that they are not being heard, then that means we are not doing our job effectively. We would all like to go to communities to have this kind of discussion in person, but we're not really able to do that now. Thank you for your feedback about that. And it means that what we're trying to do over the telephone and the computer is not effective in terms of actually engaging in dialogue. In terms of your comments about Burnt Cape, I'd like to find more details about that, because in almost all cases, the ecological reserves are open to the public. And the thing that you're not allowed to do in some cases, you're not allowed to ride an ATV, for example, because if you go off the trail, that's where you might be causing significant damage, but you can walk around. There's not an issue with that. So I'm curious as to how the regulations for these areas are being conveyed to local residents. Anyway, I'd like to have more information from you about that. That's all. So thank you for your commentary. It's very helpful to me to hear what you have to say.
Am I still unmuted?
Yes, you are.
Yeah, I think.
Okay. Well, there were tours that you had to pay for. And at that time, the locals were told that they had to pay for the tours. And to my knowledge, nobody has been told that they're allowed to go back up there. And, you know, at the beginning, when the protection was first in place, the locals were still allowed to go up and walk around without the tour operator with them. But as time went on, when government brought in the tours and the, you know, the wardens, I guess, it was all just, it had to go through the tours operation. You couldn't just go up there and walk around. So there's definitely, and now there's no tours. So to my knowledge, and I haven't been down there in a few years, but to my knowledge, there's absolutely nobody up there now.
And can I speak to that as well, Charlene, Vic?
Sure.
Yeah, that's definitely a mistake if people would be charged for that. But I just want to say there's not a blanket rejection or negative response from the people in Raleigh about that reserve. In particular, there was really good response in the schools. I think some of the children were enamored with this area and with those plants, and we know that was happening, and that could continue to happen. The only real concerns I was worried about, or that really lit up, were when ATVs went up into those areas. That actually, in some instances, we documented, not me, but others, that plants were actually destroyed by that kind of activity. So, an ecological reserve would have to do that. But I just want to say one other thing. I think about, they were short term, but I think about benefits for Raleigh. They're, one, the wardens, they were hired local people. The school children were engaged. That was terrific. I was on an international tour around the island of Newfoundland on a one of these boats that tours around the island. We stopped into Raleigh, and I know in that instance, people were excited about that. Local merchants, local stores, people stopped there because of that ecological reserve. So I don't know. I think there are tremendous benefits that we have to recognize that can come in these circumstances. And in particular, there have been, to my mind, really incredible benefits to that the Burnt Cape Ecological Reserve in Raleigh on the Northern Peninsula. And I look at that as a feather in the cap, really, for people on the Northern Peninsula who put that, who supported that in the first instance. So yes, you should not have to pay a fee, of course not. Bacalou Island is an ecological reserve. Every person in the community, in the local communities, have free access anytime, no permit, no charge. I have to get a permit to go there as a researcher. The local residents don't have to do that. So I just want to put that in there. I think there were really support for this area, and I think that's what we really want to do, is to generate that and work with people in the community to do that.
When were you in Raleigh last?
Probably when I was on that. Well, I don't know. I get up to the Northern Peninsula a fair bit. Probably the last time I went on that reserve was probably when I came off of that boat. But I've spoken to people since. I'm sorry?
How long ago was that?
Oh, I don't know, maybe 5 years. Well,
I know that there's no job up there now.
Yes, that's
there's
right.
no tours.
Right.
So, the things that were happening are no longer happening, and the school has closed down.
I agree completely. I agree, and I think that's a mistake. And I can tell you, when I was on WIRAC and we lost those jobs, that was an incredible disappointment. WIRAC didn't do that. The government of the government that you don't trust too much.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Well, the government did that, right. And I'm not against WIRAC. I'm against giving the government the protection, because I know that they don't even support. Like, once the government has this protection, they make changes and they don't care what WIRAC says afterwards. There is no feedback afterwards. It only happens to get that protection in place, and then the feedback stops. And that is my concern as a resident, even of Newfoundland, Labrador, that once the protection is in place, the feedback 100% stops.
Shirley, I'd like to just respond to some of the things that you're saying, if we have room for me to.
Sure.
Firstly, I believe you about access via tour. I have to look into it. I knew that, in my experience, from what I understand from everything that's available online, that you can access that reserve on foot, and there's not supposed to be a permit to enter that reserve. There are tours, but from my understanding was the tours were there as an interpretation. So for folks, and it seemed to be a private business, when I was checking it out, that interpretation was so that you could go into the reserve and know what plants are there and not just walk, as somebody who doesn't necessarily know. Like I would, as an outsider, I would take advantage of that interpretive tour. So that's something definitely that I will be following up with to ensure that that's being dealt with appropriately. Or if it's the letter of the law says that it's okay, but if you are getting communication that says no, then that's not all right either, and that's showcasing that lack of stewardship by our government. And I think that we really have a lot more common ground than we have difference, in the sense that we both have goals. I'm definitely distrustful of our provincial government handling protected areas, and that is why that's why I chose to resign, and I felt that there was not action, and I am impassioned to hold our provincial government accountable to their commitments, and I think that you're also impassioned to hold the government accountable to their commitments. And I understand from your online presence that you are not a person who is against conservation, that you have some very passionate conservation values. So
oh my God,
yes.
Definitely.
Yeah, I just wanted to know that I've seen what you've been posting, in particular about spraying and protecting the ecology. And I think that I'm glad that we are doing this talk, because maybe it's creating some space for dialogue between folks who are on very different sides of the pendulum. But I'll stop talking now, because I'm sure other people have questions.
Do we have any more questions from the rest of the group?
A lot of the people on the Northern Peninsula are not against protection. These cabin owners, they're not against protection. The tourism operators are not against protection. They just are against government having control over even their own land. They want the opportunity to make the decisions themselves. And that's where I'm backing everybody from the Great Northern Peninsula. These cabin owners, they have protected these lands for years. Their families have protected these lands for years. We are not against not protecting here. And I would advise anybody to even educate themselves on the Multiculturalism Act in our constitutional laws, because that act was brought in 1988. And underneath that act, the government should never have shut down the inshore fishery. They should have shut down the draggers, because the inshore fishery was shut down in 1993. And underneath that act, it states that historical and heritage comes first. And the inshore fishery was first. So that should still be here underneath that constitutional law. But it's not, because the Newfoundland government took it away. And they ignored the law.
Do we have any more questions?
Can I just add a comment to the caller in from the Northern Peninsula? I guess you can't see the chat that's going on. So somebody commented about the need for community co-management of protected areas, and pointing to some examples in BC. And I think that's the kind of thing that we would like to see. I can speak for myself here. Your commentary is very helpful.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Charlene. I think you've been really helpful for me, and I think for maybe a lot of others as well. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. I really appreciate it.
If we have nothing more from others in the group, I think we'll let Victoria go and leave it at that. I think if you have any final remarks, Victoria, otherwise.
No, I don't have any final remarks, just that if there are any graduate students that are out there that sometimes you have to not be an expert in something, but be willing to go with, you know, the best available information that you have and start a dialogue. And I think that sort of this space has been a good example of that. So don't be afraid to speak out about your research and let it be criticized by other people. Expose your warts and all. So I'll see you guys later.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Victoria.